scripture reading is from the book of Mark, chapter 9, verses 2 through 9 from the Common English Bible. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and brought them to the top of a very high mountain where they were alone. He was transformed in front of them, and his clothes were amazingly bright, brighter than if they had been bleached white. Elijah and Moses appeared and were talking with Jesus. Peter reacted to all of this by saying to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let's make 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He said this because he didn't know how to respond, for the 3 of them were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice spoke from the cloud. "This is my son, whom I dearly love. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until after the human one had risen from the dead. May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and living of these words.
Kim, I will admit to you, friends, that there's almost nothing about this story that I think makes any sense. And yet I'm also convinced it has something to tell us about our message in our mission field. So let's look at the story for a few minutes. Let's start with the first thing. So Peter, James, and John come up with Jesus, like the inner circle, right? And the text tells us that suddenly Moses and Elijah were with Jesus. And here's what I don't understand. Here's what doesn't make sense to me. How did they know that's who those guys were? I mean, think about it. So Elijah, the best that we can tell, was walking around something like 900 years before Jesus. Moses was something like 1,500 years before. How did they know what those guys looked like? Did like little like Jimmy and Johnny, did they have like trading cards? Like, All-Stars of the Faith trading cards that they were passing around when they were little kids? Like on the back, like, oh, Moses leads the universe in Pharaoh's Annoyed or something. But the Elijah one over, and it's like, oh, hey, great! He did a great thing with bringing that kid back to life. That was amazing. Like, how do they know what they looked like? It's not like they had, photos of them to pass around. We're little like Andy and Jimmy, were they like drawing pictures of Moses and Elijah in Sabbath school, like in the corner? How did they know that's who it was? I don't really get it. Like, think about it. So if, let's say for instance, all of a sudden, you look up and next to me are like, I don't know, John Wesley and Sojourner Truth. Would you know who they were? And we've had, 150 to 250 years of, actually seeing their picture. How do those guys know that's who it was? And once they did, what was that like? Was it like when you run into a celebrity? Right? You're out somewhere and you run into celebrities and, there's probably at least a couple of different responses that everybody has. So I bet Andrew was the guy who, when they figured out, oh my gosh, it's Moses and Elijah, and he's like, oh, Elijah, I gotta get your picture. Come on. He's texting, who's left at the back? He's left down at the bottom. Bartholomew or somebody's like, hey Bart, guess who's up here with us? He just slides in over Elijah, deuces, man, he's cool. Right? And I bet John was super smooth about it. I bet John is the guy when he runs into a celebrity, he's just going to pretend he's known him his whole life. He's going to go up, he's like, hey Moses, come on. He's super familiar. You know the guy. He's super familiar. He puts his arm around Moses. He's like, hey, Moses, tell us the truth. It started out with 15 commandments, right? Like that whole thing. That's right. You came down. You had the 3 tablets. And you're like, everybody, listen up. I've got the 15. And you dropped one. You have 10 commandments. Me, Meanwhile, Peter, poor Peter. Peter looks at him and he's just awestruck, right? Like when you run into Megan Mullally at Iron and Glass and you're just like, that's Megan Mullally! What do you do? You go up and you kind of stammer and you're like, I really like Lily Grace and your husband's a great woodworker. Thanks, bye. What do you do? He runs into Moses and he's overwhelmed. And so he just blubbers something. He doesn't know what he's saying. Like, oh, hey, I know, let's make some temples and, we'll call them denominations and we'll just stay up here for a while or something. That moment now. Anybody going to a Super Bowl party later today? A few of you, okay. Now, I'm guessing some of you at some point you're going to run into that one neighbor that you wish you could avoid. Come on, you all have, I have one, I know you all have one. That one neighbor you're looking to avoid, and there's going to be that moment where you're talking to him and you just want to get out of the conversation, right? And you'll be so glad when somebody's like, oh my gosh, touchdown! Like you have this excuse to get out of the conversation. I'm guessing that's something like what was going on for Peter in this moment, right? He's just babbling on, doesn't really know what he's saying, and then suddenly this voice comes and he's like, oh, thank God, literally, I can stop talking. And this voice that they decide must be the voice of God overtakes the whole scene. Says about Jesus, this is my son whom I love, listen to him. Now, does that remind you of anything? Like, I feel like I don't know about you, but I feel like we just got done with Christmas, and here we are almost on the doorstep of Lent. It feels like just a couple of weeks ago that we were having the baptism of Jesus. Now, it was a cold Sunday, and it was a combined Sunday, so a few of you weren't here, but it was really just a few weeks ago we were celebrating the baptism of Jesus, and what did the voice that day say? Anybody remember? This is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. Right, Mark's a master storyteller. He's in a hurry, but he's a master storyteller, and he's reminding us of that moment. He's connecting that baptism moment to this moment. Whatever it is that they're experiencing on the mountaintop, God wants the disciples to know just who Jesus is. And that's important because they're gonna wonder. It doesn't take long for them to have their own idea about who Jesus is and who he's supposed to be and who they want him to be, and thus who they will be in response. But the voice that they're convinced is the voice of God says, no, this is my son, whom I love very much. Listen to him. Notice the voice doesn't say, worship him. Notice the voice doesn't say, go beat people at the edge of a sword into believing him. Doesn't say, go pester folks that are different from you to make them think like you do about him. No, it says, listen to him. And as if all of that weren't bizarre and crazy and hard enough to believe, they get done with this experience, this incredible mountaintop experience, and they go to walk down, and I'm sure they're like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to tell our buddies about this. And what does Jesus say? Don't tell anybody. Tell a soul. Now, there's a couple ways we could look at this. I don't know about you, but for me, if there's something you want me to do, the best way to get me to do it is to tell me not to do it. Stay off the grass. Let's play soccer. So maybe this is Jesus using a little bit of reverse psychology, a little bit of jujitsu, and I'm like using the strength against, right? Like, don't tell anybody, because he wants them to tell. Or, have you ever had one of those experiences where no matter how many great photos you took, no matter how long you tried, how hard you tried to explain it, you just can't get somebody else to understand what you've been through? Maybe it's a literal mountaintop experience. We talked about this just a few months back when I was at Acadia National Park, and at the top of the mountain there, like even just that's not even really that big of a mountain, but it is. Even that, or if you've been to the Rockies and you explain to somebody, have you ever been to the top of Pikes Peak or one of the 14,000 footers? How do you explain to somebody, just in words, what that was like? I don't know about you, but I have a hard time doing that. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's Jesus saying to the disciples, I know you're going to want to tell your buddies about this, but they're probably not going to get it. So instead of trying to convince them of your experience, maybe try a different approach. Now, I'm pretty sure the disciples had some supersized dreams about what this was going to be like. In fact, we don't have to guess that because we know. Because just a few verses after this, they're on the road and Jesus hears the disciples grumbling and he asks them, hey, what were you arguing about? And like good disciples anywhere, they immediately avoid the question and deflect and find something else to talk about. So then it comes up again, a few verses later. Hey, what were you talking about on the road? What were you arguing about? And they're all like, well, you see, Jesus, we know that all this good stuff is happening, and so we're convinced what we're arguing about is, which of us is going to be the greatest? They have super-sized dreams about their future as followers of Jesus. I dare say, today of all days, we know something about supersized dreams, do we not? It's a Super Bowl today. Probably didn't know that, but it is. It's really probably the unofficial religion of U.S. America, right? And even if you don't like football, you're aware of it today. Even if you don't like football, you're maybe going to a party today, right? And if you leave your house at all today, the game will be on somewhere. You probably can't avoid it. It might be like the last remaining collective mountaintop experience that we have. We all have a wonderful time eating and conversing and talking with some folks and maybe having, if you're the type to have a drink or two, or maybe just some, grape juice or whatever your thing is. And then most of us have to go to work tomorrow. With this mountaintop experience, I'm going to come right back into the valley tomorrow. Just like 2 weeks ago, I changed my day off from Mondays to Fridays. What was I thinking? Why didn't I wait until after tomorrow to do this? I'm a dope. I don't know what that was about. But we're inspired by those mountaintop experiences, but we have to live in the valley. And if you're a little unsure if the Super Bowl really is a mountaintop experience for our culture, let me offer this final piece of advice, of evidence. It's the only day of the year we actually like commercials. Think about that. Every other day of the year, you turn on a YouTube video and you're like, oh, I've got to sit through 5 seconds of this ad until I can click next, right? Or you turn on your streaming service and you're like, oh, how much do I have to pay to get the ad-free version again? Because it's totally worth it not to see this ad. And yet, today, you're like, oh, I don't even really care what's going on in the game, but as soon as that ad comes on, hey, everybody quiet! I need to catch what they're saying about this ad. It's hard to explain a mountaintop experience to those who haven't been through it. Maybe that's why Jesus tells his disciples to keep quiet about it. Today in our culture is a day of big dreams, of supersized dreams. Industry experts expect this year's Super Bowl to be the largest sports betting day in America when 67 million people make a wager. My advice to you is don't do that. It's my official stance as a United Methodist. Usher is performing at the halftime show. He has supersized dreams. He said, "This night was specifically curated in my mind to have R&B take the main stage." Understandably, Usher has supersized dreams for today. Certainly, Vegas officials have supersized dreams about today. They've provided $750 million in subsidies to build the stadium where the Super Bowl will take place today. $750 million, even as the city's public schools have languished. Latasha Olson, who works at local elementary, said, "It just represents, that stadium and that money just represents that our officials don't care about us." We know about supersized dreams today. The disciples also are thinking about that mountaintop experience, but Jesus keeps sending them down into the valley. Notice that Jesus doesn't condemn Peter. When Peter's stammering and being like, "Oh, hey, we should just stay here," Jesus doesn't condemn him. Jesus doesn't scold him. Jesus doesn't say, "Don't you dare think that," or "How could you possibly say such a silly thing?" He's just gentle with him, and what's he do? Like everybody else, sends him down into the valley. They're just supposed to start their life like nothing happened. It's hard to make sense of it. And yet, that mountaintop moment is always connected to life in the valley. Messy, annoying, busy, loud, sometimes lonely value. The mountaintop offers transcendent moments, but the valley is where life happens. The valley is where we love and where we hurt. And as Velveteen Rabbit taught us, when we love and we hurt, that's how we know we're real. Mountaintop experiences are great, but it's hard for us to understand. We're always sent back into the valley because that's where life happens. Now, as a white guy steeped in privilege, I don't know much about, I can't speak to the black experience in America, but Dr. Howard Thurman can, and he writes it like this: "The basic insight of the black experience is one of optimism. An optimism that grows out of the pessimism of life and transcends it. It's an optimism that uses the permission of life as raw material out of which it creates its own strength." Got to live life in the messy valley. But here's the thing. I'm convinced that God is with us in the valley. We meet God in the mountaintop for sure, but God is with us in the valley. God is with us in the valley. So, friends, we're very soon, just weeks away, soon we'll be at that mountaintop experience of having our first worship service at Ridge Road. I promise you, weeks away. Technically, Christmas is weeks away, but weeks away. And I know for many of us that will be a mountaintop experience. I know because I've seen it. Those of you that in the last few weeks when we've had small groups or committee meetings there, some of you walked into that building for the first time in a long time, maybe forever, and I've seen it. Some of you are just like, I just got to take it in for a minute. Because you've spent years, decades even, dreaming about, talking about supersized dreams. You've spent decades dreaming about that place, and here it is in flesh. And we're so close to being there, I promise. Here's the thing, though. At some point, somebody who hasn't been part of the process is going to walk in there, and they're going to say something like, "What's the big deal?" And it's going to hurt. And with Poe, you're going to say, "Take thy beak from out of my heart." Because they haven't been to that, they haven't been through that mountaintop experience. We can't expect them to. But what they do know is life in the valley. And so don't take it personally when somebody says something about, when it's not everything that everybody wants, it's not the end-all and be-all for every single person that walks through. It's the culmination of your dreams. But even though they haven't been through that mountaintop experience, they know what it's like to walk in the valley. And so do we. I'm convinced that's the other main thing we have to share with whatever neighbors we get to bring, that we get to meet in Ridge Road. We've been through the valley. And we know how to get to the other side. Because we're not alone in the valley. We might meet God on the mountaintop, but God is with us in the valley. So when we get there, in a few weeks, our message doesn't need to be, how glorious is this place? Our message to folks that are new, when they walk through it, doesn't need to be, how glorious is this place, but how amazing is our God who walks with us through the valley. I believe that's the message we have in our mission field. We're excited about the building, but it's the mission that will move us forward. Friends, I'll admit to you, I'm not a huge fan of poetry. I'm terrible. I have no ability to write it. I try to read it sometimes, and mostly I think, I have no idea what I just read. But that poem that Amanda Gorman wrote, The Hill We Climb, speaks to me over and over again, and it seems like a good one for today. When day comes and we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid, the new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. Friends, we hope that every one of our worship services is a mountaintop experience. But tomorrow we have to go back to the real world. We got to go back to life in the valley. We may long for the mountaintop, but we're living in the valley. And God is with us in the valley. And there's beauty in the valley. And there can be justice in the valley. And there will be art in the valley. And there is hope in the valley. Because God is with us in the valley. There is love in the valley. And for each of us, I firmly believe, with God, there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only